Yeah.
Close. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sedona International Film Festival. I'm your host, Kahn. We are coming to you live from the Sedona Performing Arts Center and on Facebook Live. And joining me now is Caren Zucker and Donovan from the movie
In a Different Key.
In a Different Key. Thank you for being here in Sedona.
It's a pleasure, really.
Is this your first time?
Yeah, for me.
I was
Yes?
here for a couple hours hiking many years ago.
A couple hours.
Literally just came in for a hike, and when we drove in, I was just blown away. It's just so spectacular.
Yeah, it is. It's
Really
very
beautiful.
majestic.
Really beautiful.
Yes. So your film is about autism. It's a very interesting story. But first, I want to introduce both of you as you're both journalists.
Yes.
And In a Different Key was a book that the two of you wrote together, and it was a Pulitzer Prize.
Finalist, yeah.
Yes, awesome. So tell us a little bit about how this all came to fruition.
It starts with a boy named Mickey McGinnis, who is Karen's son, and you can pick the story up from there.
John was correspondent at ABC News, and I was a producer, and we were working together. And then I had a son, and at 2.5 years old, found out he had autism. And John was an extraordinary writer, and I asked him to sort of get on this mission with me to tell the story of autism, get it out there. We were the first network news team to ever do any stories on autism, and we did that for almost 20 years, and then we decided to do a book, which would be more everlasting. And the movie it takes it to the next level. The idea of the movie is to reach people outside of the autism community in a really big way, because they're the ones that have the greatest impact on the lives of people with autism. So the movie is more more contemporary, even though it has the history of the first person ever diagnosed with autism. It talks about issues that still exist today, all in storytelling form.
Right, which your background tells such a beautiful story, and the very first person that had autism is now how old?
Yeah, he's still with us, and he's about to turn 88, and he lives in a little town in Mississippi, and he was an relatively anonymous figure for most of his life, but his name was described in the first article that really fully captured the essence of the diagnosis of autism in 1943. And the article was published saying, there's this diagnosis we should be paying attention to, and here's what it looks like. And here are 11 children who have been examined who have it. And this was written by a psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins. He said, I've been looking at these children, and they've got something that I consider new and different. And he ranked the kids that he'd been seeing, and Donald was the first one, case number 1. So, we play with the idea that he was the first officially diagnosed child with autism. And but we didn't know where he was or his last name, so that took some detective work for some time. And we traced him finally to a little town in Mississippi, and got what we thought was his phone number. But Caren made the call, actually.
And it was pretty clear when I got the answering machine, because this voice came on and said, "Hello, happy spring, and have a wonderful fall, and a spectacular 2007. And I knew that was Donald. I called John and said, "We got him. Now we got
That's awesome.
Now we got to figure out, how to approach him, because we didn't want to just arrive on his doorstep."
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so he had been living in privacy, so what we did was we found intermediaries, people who knew him, and we presented ourselves to that outer circle of his social world and said, "Hi, we're two reporters. We're from up north. We would like to talk with him about his experience as a person with autism. Would you mind introducing us to his brother? And then through his brother, would you mind introducing us to Donald?" And at every step of the way, we said, "We will sit. If he doesn't want to talk to us, we'll go away." But everybody said, "Come on in."
No, not exactly.
Not exactly.
Actually, we found out really, really early on that this was a very special community, because when they were willing for us to meet Donald, but they basically said, "But if you mess with him in any way, we will hunt you down and get you." So they were very, very, very protective of him, and we saw that, even before we met Donald. So we knew there was something special about this community in Forest, Mississippi.
And that became a theme of the book, and is a big theme of the movie, that Donald, the first child diagnosed with autism, had a fantastic life. As it turns out, we didn't know that, but it turns out that's what we discovered, because his community supported him completely and wonderfully to this day. And that's not how it's been for most people on the spectrum. So that's the theme of the movie, is what happened to Donald and why was he so exceptional? And how can we make more communities be the way that his community was?
Now, John, in your life, you have a brother-in-law that has autism.
Yeah.
So was this prior to you putting all the research and book together, or was this kind of evolving afterwards?
My wife and I married in the early to mid 90s. Well, 94, so that's early to mid 90s. She has a brother with autism who lives in Israel. She's from Israel. He's now in his mid 50s in Israel, and I didn't know anything about autism at that time, and she said to me one day, "I want you to know my brother has autism." And I said, "What's autism?" And she explained it all to me. And then I met her mom, and now I know her mother really well since we got married. She's my mother-in-law, and we are in contact. But her mother told me stories about in Israel in the 1970s when he was first diagnosed, early 1970s, maybe even late 60s, that the kind of prospects for a person with autism, as it was then defined, were terrible. So, by which I mean, she said when her son was diagnosed at about 2.5 or 3, what should I do? The advice she was given was put him away in an institution. There's nothing you can do. Move on with your life. Take care of your other children. Put him in an institution. And she went and actually looked at the institution, and it was a horrible place. She said, "I'm never going to do this." And she and a few other families got together and created Israel's first autism organization, built and designed schools, built and designed residential communities, and really changed the game for people on the spectrum in Israel. That I had that knowledge by the time Caren asked me to work with her because of her son Mickey being diagnosed. And I was really interested in the history. So all of those years, Caren and I were doing stories for ABC about the present day. I was saying we should do a book that looks at the past also, and that's what we put together with then the fantastic fact that Donald T. was somebody we could find and get to know, who was a living part of the history, who's still here with us.
Right, and that was a beautiful part of the story too. Caren, I want to talk to you a little bit too about your son. The job that you have is not, it's not like a 9-to-5 job at all. And how did you find working, being a journalist and a reporter, and then having an autistic child? Was that difficult for you, or how did you adjust to caring for your son and all of that?
Yeah, well, it changed everything basically. So I started working half-time, and but I really turned I still covered news in general, but really turned my attention to autism and trying to get the story out there. And that's when I would work full-time and travel when we would do stories together on autism, because it was I have 2 other children, so I have 3 kids.
Okay.
And it's just how life turned out.
Mm-hmm.
And but I'm really excited about the film, because I think that the film will reach the general public in a way that the book didn't, and that the film is really important and can really change the world for people with autism.
Mm-hmm.
So we're excited to get it out there and to get as many people as possible to see it, because we think that once they see it, they'll understand autism in a different way, and sort of once you see something, you can't unsee it.
Right.
And this film, through the stories, really tells you the broad spectrum, and it talks about racism and poverty and people who are severely autistic, and people who have autism who can speak for themselves, and and most people don't know the breadth
Mm-hmm.
of autism, and they're wonderful stories. The people that we talked to and met are really pretty extraordinary people.
That's great. And I have one other question too that I want to ask you. In doing this for so many years, how have you seen autism and understanding of it change from the time that you started doing this to now?
In the biggest way, the definition of autism has become much broader and in some ways looser than it was 25 years ago. for example, everybody's heard of Asperger's syndrome as part of the autism spectrum. Asperger's syndrome was canceled as a category, and I literally was removed from the list of diagnoses, and people with Asperger's syndrome were moved under the autism umbrella, and in other ways, the definition of autism got bigger and bigger and bigger. That word started to include bigger and bigger groups of people. 25, 30 years ago, that wasn't the case. People had to be quite challenged, in most cases not capable of living independent lives, to have an autism diagnosis. Today, that's not the case. There are people who have the diagnosis who can live quite independently, who have very, very serious, challenging social struggles, but they can speak for themselves, and they can talk for themselves.
And live independent lives. I mean, when my son was first diagnosed, we considered him, very, very high functioning, because he was capable of living semi-independently. Now he's sort of in the middle, because the spectrum has become so large that people who have families and who can work and lead incredibly productive lives are defined as the same person who may be in diapers their whole life and not hitting their head against a wall. So the spectrum's gotten, for me, too broad, because they're not all one thing. They sometimes talk about autisms, and I see it more that way personally.
Also, just the term autism has become much better known. It's not, 2020. When Caren and I first pitched our first story to ABC News about autism, we had a very hard time getting a yes to go for it, because what we were told was, who cares? That affects such a small number of people, and nobody really knows what it is. Nobody's talking about it, and that just has changed dramatically. My mother-in-law and other people have told us, when we were researching the history, people whose kids were diagnosed in the 60s told us the same story over and over again. They would say to somebody, "My child is autistic," and the response would be, "Artistic, that's wonderful." Painting, or that happened again and again and again, because the term was so unfamiliar. It's not the case at all today.
Well, tell us when your movie is going to be shown again.
Friday at 4:10 at the Hawkins Theater, and Harkins Theater.
Harkins Theater, yeah.
I think it's Theater 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe it's 2.
It's either
at the
one
Harkins
or,
Theater.
It's either 1 or 2. We had a screening on Tuesday that we just were it was just so extraordinary.
Yeah.
The response, and it wasn't the autism community. It was film goers who wanted to see the movie, and
The mayor was there.
That's awesome.
And she said
It was really-
she approached us later, saw us having dinner, and approached us and just said, "Everybody's got to see this movie. It really opens eyes." And that was our goal: is to reach people who what we don't want is a niche film that people think, oh, you have to have autism or to go.
Right.
To our goal is for everybody else to watch it, enjoy it. It's got laughs, it's got tears, it's got Donald, the first person ever diagnosed with autism, but to come away thinking, I have a part in this story. I do have a role in this story. I didn't know that I did, and my role is to be part of one of the good guys, to be supportive, to be embracing, to be accepting, to be appreciative of people on the spectrum.
Well, thank you. Thank you
Thanks,
for
Ms.
bringing
Carol.
it to the attention of the public. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your gift. Thank you for your knowledge and understanding and compassion. So
Thank you, Carol,
thank you,
very much.
for talking to us. It's lovely.
And we'll be back with more from the Sedona International Film Festival after this.